14, 2011 System Oversight Meeting of the Prince George's County Board of Education. Before I begin, please turn off your wireless communications as they tend to interfere with the taping of the meeting. And during this System Oversight meeting, we will be discussing finance, accounting, and budget. Our colleague Peggy Higgins will not be in attendance this afternoon. Ms. Waller has informed us that she will not be in attendance this afternoon as well. We will start with a board prayer by Ms. Boston. Thank you, Ms. Boston. Ms. Jackson, call the roll, please.
Mr. Armwood?
Present.
Ms. Boston?
Present.
Mr. Barrows?
Present.
Ms. Eubanks? Ms. Johnson?
Present.
Mr. Harris?
Present.
Mrs. Beck?
Present.
Ms. Jacobs?
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, prior to adoption of the agenda, please join me in a moment of silence for Mr. James Wright, brother of Tawana Wright, custodian in Sasser Administration Building. Thank you for that moment of silence. Also, colleagues, prior to adoption of the agenda, please note the following changes. 9.1 to 9.3 under new business have been deferred to the April 28, 2011 meeting. Under 9.4 under new business, this item has been removed from the agenda. And items 10.1, the revised board policy 8345, public comment and participation at Board of Education meetings have also been added as unfinished business, as well as the 2011-2012 school calendar. May I please have a motion to adopt the April 14, 2011 System Oversight Meeting agenda?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Armwood. Thank you, Ms. Beck. It's been properly moved and second that we accept and adopt the agenda as amended. All in favor?
Aye.
Any objections or abstentions? Seeing none, motion passed. Colleagues, may I have a motion at this time to approve the following meeting minutes: March the 19th, 2011 Board and Superintendent Retreat, and the March 24th, 2011 Board meeting minutes.
Move to accept.
Is there a second? Second. It's been properly moved and second. Thank you, Ms. Beck and Ms. Boston. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Objections or abstentions? Motion passed. Public comment on agenda items for which the board will take action. We have we have one public comment, but none on the legislative update. So, Mr. Lucci, if you would come forward.
Sorry. Around day 87, I was clicking my heels saying there's no place like home, but it didn't work. I was still there. Let me talk first about what you have before you is a 6-page memo listing all of the pieces of legislation that are on the governor's desk now having to do with public education and any kind of impact on Prince George's County. What I'll have for you next meeting is more of a budgetary analysis about what was done during the session. As you recall, there were 7 pieces of legislation that affected just Prince George's County public schools. 3 of them were cross-filed. All 7 of them were opposed by the Prince George's County Board of Education. At the end of the session, 5 of those 7 pieces failed. They were not enacted. Of the 2 that were enacted, one had to do with the surcharge, stating that if your house had to be replaced, you could not have to pay the surcharge. We're able to limit that legislation in 3 ways. One is to limit it to the rural tier. Second is to require reporting of all exemptions. And third was to have the bill sunset in 2 years, and so that was done. And then the last piece of legislation that did pass was the Transparency Act sponsored by Delegate Valentino Smith. And of course, as you know, that's something that you've talked about doing anyway. So that has to do with the local legislation. With regard to the state budget, as you know, we ended the session with the governor's budget of being $20 million less than we received last year. And that was what he called level funding, which was better for some and worse for others based on the formula. The House of Delegates decided that level funding meant a decrease in per pupil expenditures, and that was not consistent with what they thought the Bridge to Excellence law called for. And so they raised the per pupil expenditure back so it would stay the same. That resulted in $10 million coming back to Prince George's County Public Schools out of the 20 that we were down. But then they decided that they should charge a fee to the school system for administering the pension plan for educators in this jurisdiction. So that cost $2 million. We're back down to $8 million out of the 20. Then the bill went to the Senate, and the Senate decided to pass an increase in the alcohol tax. First time in over 50 years that the tax on liquor was increased. First time in more than 25 years it was increased on beer or wine. And $4.4 million of that went to the Prince George's County Public Schools, and now we're up to a net of 12.4. Then the alcohol tax bill went to the House, and the House decided, in addition to the passing that bill, they would pass a second alcohol tax bill sponsored by our own delegate Carolyn Howard that brought $9 million in school construction money to Prince George's County. Now, of course, you really can't count that towards the 20 because it's the capital budget and not the operating budget. But nonetheless, that's the long, drawn-out version of what happened. And so while we're better off now than we were when the session began, we're still not better off than we were before the governor's budget was delivered to the legislature. That's pretty much all I have to report at this point, but I will have more detail for you in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Mr. Lucci. Ms. Johnson?
Mr. Lucci, if you could just do a very brief on the death of net taxable income.
Yes, I'm sorry I didn't mention that because I think going into the session it was thought that this would be the best year to have the best chance of having that pass. And it was probably the largest disappointment of the session that it did not pass. I do know, and I can tell you firsthand, that our county executive many times met with the governor to encourage him to put money into the budget so that it could be done on a statewide basis without any jurisdiction being penalized. And there was some discussion in Annapolis when the legislation did not move that perhaps the only other way is to seek redress through the courts. And so that's what people else what folks were talking about there. But that was probably the largest disappointment of the 90 days, that the bill did not move despite very good hearings that we had on both the House and Senate side with great representation from the board coming there to the hearings.
Thank you, Mr. Lucci. I had one quick question on House Bill 364. Just, and also for the benefit of Superintendent Height and his staff who will have to deal with this, the way I read this bill, it looks like we are fine until the state board comes up with regulations. My discussion with Delegate Walker, the angst around it is that, obviously there are some students in other jurisdictions that might have a 1.5 who can still play sports. And so he wanted to have specific guidelines that would apply to all local school boards. So is it correct that what we're doing now with regard to our no-E policy stands until the state board comes up with specific designations?
That is correct. And
Okay.
With a new superintendent, it might be a while till that happens. But that is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Madam Chair, we're also anticipating minimum standards that they're going to propose across the state.
Right.
So it could be that our standards will still compare more favorably or less favorably against, depending on who's looking at it.
Okay.
But I anticipate them coming up with a minimum standard of,
Oh, and so you have to meet the minimum, but you could go above it,
absolutely.
like state, federal. Oh, wow, okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, colleagues, that brings us to the system oversight presentation for today. Dr. Hyatt, I yield to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Today's presentation is for finance, accounting, and budget, and there were some specific items that the board asked us to include as a part of this system oversight presentation. So I'm going to now yield to Mr. Stansky, who will he and his department will walk us through this presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Hyatt, members of the board. Pleasure to represent the Business and Management Services Division. Just give a quick overview. We have 5 departments: Budget and Management Services, Financial Services, Purchasing and Supply Services, Payroll Services, and Fiscal Compliance and Quality Assurance. Like many of the other central office departments and divisions, through the FY12 budget process, we did some reorganizing, and my team will go through each one of their departments and talk a little bit, about how the year is going and also the reorganization moving forward for next year. So, Madam Chair, I guess we'll go through each department and then answer questions after each department presentation.
Yes, I think that would be easier.
Process. All right. So with that, I will introduce Mr. Brent Johnson, who will walk us through the Budget and Management Services presentation.
Good afternoon. Budget and Management Services has 2 core services, financial planning and execution of the budget. And our primary metric revolves around the idea of making sure that our functional spending stays with the percentage of functional categories stay within the appropriated appropriations within each function. This slide shows what our current resources are by core service. Of course, in FY12, our FTE total goes up to 23. We're adding 6 financial positions from Title I office, as well as incorporating 2 positions from fiscal compliance. Financial on the budget dashboard here, this gives you an overview of our primary metrics. Again, percentage of categories within budgeted resources. You'll see this is through February, and this looks at the number of categories that have stayed within a certain range. So for February, we're within a range of about between 62% and 70%, 62% and 72%, which we're viewing as the acceptable range that the category should fall under. And so I'll go more into that as I go through the slides. Also, we have a percentage of categories that changed up 3% plus or minus 3% of funds transferred. That reflects our last financial review. We're working towards proposing a second financial review that you'll be seeing in several weeks. Percent of schools plus or minus 10% projected per pupil amount. This is an indicator that we will be looking at as we're starting the student-based budgeting initiative. Loading of all new grants within 15 days of receipt of award notice. This is a measure that we're going to continue to work on. As you can see, we've had some dips. In February, we were able to ramp back up. But again, this represents new grants. We load grant loads on a daily basis, but this represents new grants. But we'll have more discussion on that as well. Percentage of total spending between total and planned resources, that's just showing you what has been spent overall in the budget so far through February. And so we're at 62%. And then percent of grant funds expended, we're at 52% through February. And again, that's overall. That's not by category. That's just overall spending. This slide goes into detail in terms of the various functions. And what I've highlighted here are the functions where we have stayed within 62 and 72% range at this point in time. As you can see, there are some functions, most of the functions there are about 6 functions where we're below this range. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't also mean that that's a bad thing or a good thing. It's just a measure of where we are right now, because in some cases you have expenses and encumbrances that may occur earlier in the year that may not always occur equally on a monthly basis. But there are things that we'll have to address, such as you'll see there's 98% under Function 205. There was a prepaid lease payment that was misaligned, so we have to make sure we fix that going forward. But again, at the bottom, you'll see 63% expended on the unrestricted side. This functional detail shows you the restricted side, all the restricted grant funding. And here we have one category, other instructional costs, where we're within the 62% and 62 and 72% range. Again, grants, we operate differently because they come online at different points of time. So at this point, we're at 52% total restricted funds expended. And this is something that my office, in conjunction with other offices, we're working with program staff to make sure that we spend all of our grant funds. So we're at the end, we are maximizing our resources. And again, this is just a functional detail, just the combined current expense budget. And this is the 5 out of the 15 categories where we're within that range. And again, that's where the 33% comes from. And just as a caveat, food service, obviously food services is the subsidy that we provide to the food services program. Again, we don't expect this, that doesn't really get touched until the end of the year. So again, that function, at this point in time, we should not be expending there. This is a new slide we wanted to add just to provide some clarification regarding state aid and restricted fund resources, and just to provide some clarity in terms of what we've received from the state as far as the foundation program, comp ed, student transportation aid, and then also just to provide clarity that this is formula funding that we receive from the state. It's not restricted grant funding like the other restricted grants. This is based on the formula, and of course, when we receive it, we can use it based on the plans that we put forth. Also, there's this brief discussion about the technology grants, and then again, another summary about the Education Jobs Fund, where the full amount was about $31.6 million. As you recall, in the first financial review, we allotted 6.3, the first portion of that amount, to go towards classroom balancing, to cover additional instructors and teachers. And then the remaining disbursement, we're going to be proposing to support district-wide fringe benefits for classroom-based positions. And again, I'm not going to read this for you because you've had this in front of you, but this is just our analysis of the findings that we're finding in terms of the functional review and some of the actions that we'll continue to take to make sure that we end the year on the correct note. All right. Thank you. Any questions? I'm sorry. Apologize.
Well, absolutely. Okay. Ms. Beck and Ms. Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. On slide 7,
Okay.
you have special education highlighted at 67% expended. At what point does it jump out to you that we're going to be in trouble with special ed costs?
Well, when we're doing right now we're looking at our second financial review. This is, I guess, one view where we're looking at it functionally, but we're also looking at it object-wise. We're looking at the components as well. So we are looking at other views to make, if there are any warning flags, to make sure we have to do something or not. This is, at this point, this is just showing the functional level. So if I just looked at this by itself, of course, you know, I would say, oh, we're kind of on track. But this is, we also look at some other areas. So we are looking at keeping tabs on special ed to make sure that we are going to end in the right way.
Okay. And then also, where do you have the, I don't know how to say this, the CIP budget? Where will we see how you're tracking that?
That's a good question.
That's
Yeah.
still under Mr.
Right.
Stansky, right?
It's a shared responsibility, but yeah, you know, and honestly, it's not in one of the metrics that we're presenting. But yeah, it is. We have an analyst both in accounting and in budget that is assigned to do the CIP budget portion, and you know, we could certainly in our next presentation give updates on that as well.
Because that seemed to be an area where we have a lot of fluctuation in terms of how projects come in and changes and all of that. And I thought that that would have a different set of dashboards.
Ms. Hathaway Beck, we're in the process of constructing those for the CIP portion of this. It's why a year ago, or less than a year ago, we moved it to this department.
Right.
But now we're attempting to construct those targets inside of CIP for the purpose of reporting. And how do we report those fluctuations and how projects come on and go off and change?
So when would we get that?
Mr. Stansky, I know you've been working on it.
Your next FAB CIP meeting.
Okay, oh, great. Thank you.
I had a quick question on the transport 209.
Yes.
Function 209. That student transportation services includes all transportation.
Correct.
So I'd like to see it separated out by special ed transportation.
Okay.
Is that okay? Ms. Johnson?
Thank you. Just a couple about the slides themselves, your color coding. Could you let me know or us know under at risk, when doing these, what information can you provide, not today, but in the next, the subsequent ones you do, that explain the contributing factors of an AR rating? That would be helpful. The fact that you note it, but for me, I'd like to know what is causing the at-risk factors. You know, what are they? And can they be mitigated? When's your timeline for looking to get you back on track, to get it into the green? So some perhaps are a little less urgent than others, but no matter, if you've noted that they're in red, then clearly that is an alert signal for you about the delivery of services within that. So I'd like to know in your next presentation, could we have you know, an asterisk or something that indicates the why?
Well, Ms. Johnson, if you go to slide 9, we do talk about the findings.
Okay, and that's where they're located?
Exactly.
Okay. Then I'm going to suggest the findings are closer to where they are in your presentation. Because oftentimes, maybe it's only because the way I read each one separately and with its relationship to the thing as a whole. And oftentimes going back, the findings, the point is lost. So could you get it closer?
Right.
Because that would be helpful.
Okay.
The other is, since you've answered that, my next question is about the blue, the change, where it says change equals purpose to remove or replace. How will we know whether the blue box column or the blue item that are noted where it says what change means, how will we know if the purpose is remove or the purpose is replace? We don't know. You all understand it, but I don't understand why it says change for either one of those, and how can we know that? And will we know why it was either remove or it was replace? Because remove means it's not coming back, we're not going to do that anymore. Wherein replace means we're adapting and evolving it. So for me, looking at this information, it was more about having this information to be clear about what momentum and movement I'm looking at across that particular series of slides.
No, I think that's a fair point. And if there were, like in the case of my office, if I did have a metric that, let's say I was proposing to remove or change, we would definitely footnote it, provide, a slide or something like that to explain, okay, this is what it was, this is, what it is now, and this is why.
That would be helpful. And then, of course, moving, instead of your waiting until the end to list all of your findings, if your findings could be as close to the original notation of the at-risk as possible would be really helpful, because that way you would be able to say, here is what we're doing about that. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Colleagues, any other questions on this particular area? Seeing none. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Vito Weeks. I'm the Accounting and Financial Reporting Officer sitting in for the Finance Director, and I'm giving an overview of the financial services area. There are 4 core services in financial services, and they correspond more or less to the departments. We receive funds, invest funds, we pay bills, keep records, and manage risk. The integrity is a baseline for all of the work we do, and the collaborators generally are within the financial services department and within business management services, and also we deal with schools and other offices. There are 51 individuals in the financial services department. Most of those individuals are in financial accounting and reporting, and we also have most of the expenditure in that area. Risk management has 2 individuals. The amount of dollars look proportionately high, largely because included there are funds for property claims. Our dashboard in financial accounting relates to external audits. We typically have 3 each year, and we have been on time consistently. Our audit findings have declined. Currently, there was only 1 audit finding, and we anticipate that our goal is 0 this year. We typically will internally try to close the Oracle financials in a timely manner within 15 days of the following month, and we've sort of got that down such that, say, for example, for March, we were able to close yesterday, which was 13 days. In accounts payable, we've been able to process a large number of invoices and also pay invoices on a timely manner. The target is 100%, and in January, we're able to reach 98%. In Treasury, we've been able to generate the number of financial reports that were anticipated, also able to ensure that these reports were accurate. We've been able to more than double the benchmark for investment returns. They're currently quite low, but at least we're averaging about almost 1/3%. We've been able to process as many invoices as year to date as almost as much as the entire target for FY11. And our invoices are consistently, the accuracy rate is rising. It's currently at about averaging close to 90%. One area where we have some warning relates to receivables being greater than 60 days, and that is in large measure due to relations with the District of Columbia Public Schools and also with Maryland National Parks, and we've been working consistently to improve that. With risk management, the benchmarks correspond to trying to cut down the number of claims, but as you all are aware, it's, no one can actually determine how many, make sure that you're not going to have a fire or cut down these type of property claims. So that's one area where we are at risk because the number of overall claims have been, they're larger than we have anticipated. There's some detail in this slide that provides data on claims, and both the number of claims and the average dollar amount has been increasing in the current year. The warning areas that we're trying to deal with, and I think staff in cash management has been doing an excellent job, the assistant treasurer and her staff, dealing with that. We've had a series of meetings with the District of Columbia Public Schools and with Maryland National Parks Commission to deal with issues related to late payments. And in accounts payable, although it's very difficult to reach the goal of 100% because of built-in measures that we have in Oracle to deal with internal controls, the accounts payable manager and her staff have been doing an excellent job of trying to meet the objective of paying invoices on time. And with that, it's our presentation from Financial Services, if you've got any questions.
Thank you so much. We do. Ms. Beck and Ms. Johnson.
Can you give me an idea about the dollar amount we're talking about with DC Public Schools?
DC Public Schools, the number has declined tremendously. We previously billed on a semester basis. We've had receivables as high as $7 million at a particular time from DC Public Schools. We've reduced that to under $1 million currently. One of the problems related to adoptions and how students were classified. So what would happen is we would bill the District of Columbia and they would dispute these items, the particular students. We've developed a better means of tracking and dealing with these issues. So it's unlikely. Maybe Matt might want to talk more about that.
And we've actually also had a couple meetings with the Department of Social Services over at the county, who has helped us, who keep really up-to-date records on which children are placed in foster care and then which are adopted. And that's always the dispute with them is they, so we have children from the District of Columbia who get placed into homes in Prince George's County. We then bill them, and they dispute the legitimacy of the foster care placement, and then there's always that period between adoption and placement where there's always disputes also. So as Mr. Weeks has indicated, that we do have it under $1 million now. It's getting better, but it's still not where we'd like it to be.
And the vast majority are charges related to tuition, out of
Exactly.
out of
Yes.
state,
Yep.
I guess, tuition. And I mean, this begs the obvious question: do we have the same problem when we're paying other counties for our children?
Well, the
I mean,
magnitudes
do we
are
contest this also?
the magnitudes are nowhere near the same, and we don't really have a problem there, really.
Okay, so we
Yes.
don't drag out payment to hold on to it longer.
No.
On slide, cost of claims, slide 14, those are cumulative numbers, right? The claim numbers are cumulative, they're not by month.
Yes.
Very good. And the one audit finding, what would that be?
Yes. Okay. The one audit finding related to the single audit, the A133 audit, and it, grants audit. I'm sorry, I'm trying to thinking accounting parlance. It relates to restricted funds, the grants, the federal funds, and it related to proper authorization and also how bank deposits were handled with in food services. We have a individual who's dedicated to food services since the superintendent is taking that area very seriously,
Right.
trying to cut costs. We've devoted resources to that. Unfortunately, although we've put a lot of resources in there, the auditors have informed us that this is not a major program this year when they're auditing, but that doesn't matter because we would like to
Get it right, yeah,
improve food services.
great, thank you.
Ms. Johnson?
Ms. Hathaway begged to ask a question about your liability page, this one. And the question she was about, is this cumulative?
Yes.
Now, you have the columns by month, and you have 2010, and then you have 2011. Well, of course, we're not in July of 2011 yet. However, I need you to better explain, because as I'm looking at this, and you also indicated, because I wrote that down, our liabilities are increasing.
Yes.
The costs, the claims. Where's the explanation sheet about the areas that is causing the rise, and what are we doing about it?
How can we predict when a fire is going to occur, for example, or a flood? Or a lot of these items relate to acts of God. So when you look at it in that respect, I think there's not too much you can do. In other areas with property, I think there's, for example, bus drivers, accidents. There's a lot that you can do there. And I think there's impetus. The risk manager and his team are trying to do their best to mitigate some of these risks and deal with them. But to a large extent, it's up in there.
Clearly, claims that are coming from circumstances of nature, that's not what I would be talking about.
Okay.
It would be the latter category, human. And therefore, what I would like to have seen is a breakout of those obvious, non-predictable, acts of nature you just don't know. But those items under auto, et cetera, driver error, employee, whatever it is, things that we do have some level of control over because we have administrative procedures that do governance over how work in certain areas needs to be done would be important. Because clearly, the risk to the school system in payouts of claims takes money out of the system, which takes money out of schools for children. And so it is important that when we get a report about risk, I mean, clearly we all know there's going to be a certain amount of risk. I'm concerned about whether our risk is exceeding what would be normal, whatever normal is. And so this report would be helpful to have this information presented in a better format. Interior to your office, I understand, you want the numbers. The board needs to know about prevention. We need to know to direct the superintendent whether we need to have different kinds of workshops, etc. So it is of a concern to me.
So,
why is it going up? What are we doing about it? And what are our biggest liability categories?
Right. So obviously, you know, the biggest issue on the stuff we can control is safety and safety training, and while probably in the next presentation we give on risk management, it should be in collaboration with the safety office, which is over in supporting services, whose main job really is to ensure a safe work environment to prevent these claims. You know, I know in transportation there's training that goes on yearly to help prevent accidents and prevent injuries on the job. So we can certainly, as we move forward, get that information along with the actual raw numbers.
And within that report, finally, could you let the board know the percentage of payout that we're doing of the total budget and what could be happening with children and their learning if we weren't paying all that out? Do a balance sheet, balance against that. That may be important for people to understand. Every time you do something that is against how we say it ought to be done, it's costing our children. Right. Thank you.
And Ms. Johnson, if I could just add to the question that you raised, because really what you're talking about is really a function of our risk management office. So Mr. Danjan, I think, will be able to supplement this to give the board more disaggregated data to show why we have the spikes in these percentages over the last 3 or 4 month period that's reflected here. And what Mr. Stansky said was absolutely correct. There's a lot of in-service training ongoing through Department of Transportation to deal with bus driver safety, but we can certainly provide the board with the numbers that are behind what's reflected here. But that's more a function of the risk management assessment.
Dr. Hite?
Just if I may, thank you, Mr. Thomas and Ms. Johnson, for that question. I think it also speaks to how we report this information and how information is reported across two groups who really manage both the information and the support that we put in place to address some of these. And we're talking about risk management and loss prevention and the safety office, and all of us have reports that we do like this. And as I'm thinking about your question, Ms. Johnson, perhaps it's an opportunity for us to look at how we put all of that information together when we're reporting on any of the three, because separated it communicates a part of the story, but all together it communicates a more full picture. And as I was looking at this, I was just thinking that would have been helpful. That information from the other departments would have been helpful as we look at this chart.
And not to mention that we know some recommendations have already been made that I know Ms. Schilling is working through that would be helpful through this process. I think it really also demonstrates that we're dealing with whatever the liabilities are.
And as you indicated, Madam Chair, we also talked about a training issue with respect to transportation. And so there are a lot of moving parts to this, and Ms. Johnson, we will have to really think more comprehensively internally about how we pull that information together so you get the full picture.
concludes the questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Board, Superintendent. I'm Keith Miles. I'm the Director of Purchasing. And we're going to report on the status of purchasing and how we are working toward our performance goals and objectives, and making sure that every school has what it needs to be successful, and every student has what they need to be successful. In purchasing, we have 3 core service goals, the first of which is acquisition of quality goods and services, the second of which is distribution of inventory, mail, system relocation services, and the third is minority business. And the first 2 goals, basically, they support all of the core services for the system and the master plan throughout the district. Why? Because that's the area that provides the services as well as the goods to support learning. And everything we do in those areas really is set to make sure that nobody waits for no student or no teacher or no administrator waits for any supply or any item that will enhance the learning environment. In purchasing, in the core service number 1, we have 15 staff persons that work with purchase orders and support for accounts payable, support for vendors. And core service number 2, we have 49 individuals, our staff persons, and they basically work with in the shop stores and the supply services area. And core service number 3, minority business, while you may only see one individual listed there, everyone in purchasing and all of the other areas supports that particular goal. And they support that particular goal by making sure that through the bidding and the ordering system, that schools and our buyers are aware that minority businesses are a part of our process, and that we're looking to include minority businesses as much as possible in every facet of what we do. And to repeat, let's go to our dashboard. Our dashboard in the purchasing in core service number 1, we have 3 areas that we look at, the first of which is making sure that POs can get through the system within 4 days. For the most part, we've been achieving those goals. We've been pretty much at the 80 to 85% to 90% throughout the year. And pretty much all of our goals are set at a particular target where we anticipate making sure that everything is done timely. But I think one of the suggestions that's being made is that we're going to move everything to 100% next year. And then we'll be looking at the exceptions. So the idea is just to make sure that we have that we can identify why we're not meeting the target of 100%. There are some challenges there, but we're going to make sure that we track as much as we can to make sure that items and supplies and materials are in the schools and in the schools timely. As you can see, the orders for goods delivered within 30 days, which is a measure that we've set to 30 days, but for the most part, we've been in the 90 to 95 percentile all year for that. And as I've indicated, I think 100% is certainly achievable in that particular category. Some of the other categories, there may be some challenges, but we think we're going to be able to, identify the exceptions. Core service number 2, distribution. In this particular area, there's a number of responsibilities that fall on our staff. Number 1, or that helps the school. And the first of which is we deliver mail to schools every single day for the most part. We have a list that goes 3 days a week for touching every school, but for the most part, we're always going someplace every single day. The other issue is that the relocation services, where we're moving offices or we're moving items or moving furniture, that happens on a regular basis. in addition to pickups at the food bank and a number of other special runs that we provide. And we need to make sure that we incorporate those into the inventory piece. The primary goal of that, the primary function of that particular goal is when we purchase items and we store it in the warehouse. When we purchase in bulk so that we can achieve the cost savings by purchasing in bulk and distributing them through our distribution system. The important part of that is making sure that when the schools put their orders in, that they're able to get the delivery within 6 days. We've had some challenges with that, but overall, we see improvement. One of the concerns that we have, we still haven't been able to remove the 2-day, the Saturday and Sunday from our metric, and we've not been able to remove holidays and certain other special days, if you will, where we're not in school. And as you know, anytime you move from a 5-day work week to a 4-day work week, it adds an additional stress to that particular metric. Our third core service is minority business participation. Overall, the minority business participation, we've achieved the results, the desired results, and we've exceeded them overall. There are still some challenges in there. For example, we're at the minority women participation, which is number 2. We're at 4.86%, and that sort of creates a problem because the goal is 5.0. We were able to reach 6.9 last year. We think we'll still be able to get there because in the second quarter there's always some challenges that we're faced with. And we think we're going to be able to overcome that in the third and fourth quarter. The third quarter just ended, so in essence, it takes about 15 to 16 days to tally up the results. And you really have to wait for the close of the financial system before we can tally the results so that we're giving you accurate data. The awards of MBEs is always, we've always met or exceeded that particular goal. We're currently at 35%. And these were the initial numbers up front. We have since gone back and changed some of those numbers, and I think you'll see the numbers coming up a little later on. These are the drivers for Core Service 2 where we think we're going to have some challenges. We're just going to continue to work with IT because some of the challenges is trying to be able to root out some of the day issues and some of the system issues when everybody's on the system really slows down that process, and sometimes our WMS system is not totally integrated the way we think it should, and it's not updating the files accordingly. So once we're able to work through some of that, we think we'll be able to meet some of the goals. The next slide gives you all of the MBE data, and it gives you also the actual numbers that are involved. The actual numbers tell you specifically the data that we're looking at, and we have support and backup that will show you who the vendors are, who the contracts are, as well as any information you may want with regard to how we're enacting that particular program or how we're enacting or just extracting that number. One of the important pieces that I want you to look at is that last data that shows minority business by location, and you'll see that 46% of all of the MBEs are in Prince George's County, and you have the dollar amount there, which is $19 million. The other important piece that we want to look at is the state documentation, which is going to be on the next page. But as you look at these numbers, our goal is 30%, but we're actually exceeding in pretty much every category. I should point out in the first column, we have the MBE participation expenditures overall. That's system-wide. It covers everything in the system. And so for the most part, we have to exclude textbooks and some like certain risk payments or what have you. But the idea is that I think to achieve that number, it really takes a lot of effort, and I want to commend my staff for working on that. And each of the numbers of awards you'll see that there are 172 bids that were prepared. 53 of them went to minority business firms. And the award of MBE dollars, there were 40 million, and it looks like that was, I can't see that in numbers, look like it's cut off, but which amounted to roughly 47% when you look at quarter 1 and 2. Another area that we're excelling is really in the CIP and the maintenance area. We're pretty much ranked number either 1 or 2, depending on how you look at the data. But overall, our MBE for the first quarter was 62%, and our MBE percentage on the state dollars, 33.87 for the second quarter. I think Baltimore City and we've been going neck and neck on that particular number. But they have the ability to change some numbers after the fact, and we really don't. So we think we're really number 1. We think our outreach efforts and our connection with minority businesses in the area is steadily increasing. We keep a list of the new vendors that we work with each year and the contracts that they get, and we encourage them. And I might add that there are at least 4 small subcontractors that are now some of our prime contractors. So we've seen that movement, which is the ideal movement that you would want to see when you're working with MBEs. Next, we have the special presentation on contract governance. All of our contracts are governed by the Maryland Educational Article, COMAR, commercial laws, and MOUs, and board policy, and what's written in our procurement procedures and ethics manual. Everything that we do with contracts has to include either one or all of them, all of these items, depending on what you're looking at with regard to governance. Next is the types of contracts that we have in our office. We have purchase orders, which is your regular standard contract, blanket orders, which are internal requisitions, formal contract agreements are agreements that we develop with mainly consultants and different organizations, MOUs, same thing. And then we have what we call riders and jock. Riders are contracts that that's been entered to in other jurisdictions. Maryland law provides us with the opportunity to use those contracts at will, but they must go through the purchasing office to determine whether or not they've gone through a process that the board has determined that we must follow. The other is JOC, is our job order contracts that are approved by the board, our consultant letter of intent, leases, permits, license, indefinite quantity and term agreements. These are contracts that basically mean that you can buy a specific or a large amount or any amount for a particular price. The price is what's negotiated on those. So it really doesn't matter what you're buying. The term agreement is just an agreement that states specifically what you're going to be buying at what price for what period of time. Next is obviously the bill of sale, waiver, and the releases that we have within the offices from products and from items. What do we do in our office with, what numbers are we looking at? During the course of the year, we probably run through about 1,500 contracts, about 30,000 requisitions, and 25,000 purchase orders. There's a difference between the purchase order and the requisition. Requisition precedes a purchase order. However, if there was a purchase order that was created prior to the requisition with the same vendor, then we're allowed to attach that requisition to the purchase order. So technically, you could actually have 50,000 requisitions and only 25,000 purchase orders. Bid solicitations, we run through about 250 to 300 a year. Renewals, we probably have about 300. And that pretty much concludes my presentation. We do have one or two other items that we need to note, and that is that going forward, the state has, with regard to sub-goals, which are the African American and the female goals, the states have eliminated them as it relates to the construction project because there are a lot of jurisdictions not achieving those numbers. We will still, because our board has committed to the 30% goal, we'll still keep those in effect with us. but it's not required with the state as we speak. I think that concludes my presentation, and I'll take any questions. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Miles. First on the list, Ms. Boston.
Mr. Miles, on your distribution list, you mentioned something about the holidays and weekends. What does that overtime look like? That must be horrendous.
When I say holidays and overtime, it really is not about staff producing the overtime. It's when we measure the data. We have to measure the data on a 7-day, so that means we can't extract. For example, if someone puts in a request on Thursday, and it's supposed to, we're supposed to resolve it on Monday. Instead of it being resolved in 2 days or 3 days, we have to incorporate the Saturday and the Sunday. So, for example, it should say 3.7, but it's really going to say 5.7 because we have to add the Saturday and the Sunday in. So, in essence, my staff, the only time we really do a lot of overtime is with school opening, because we want to make sure that we don't get anything wrong. And everybody, on the first day of school, we want to make sure that kids have, a place to sit. They have food, they have pretty much everything. But the Saturdays and the Sundays, as it relates to the data, it only applies to it being added in as part of the calculation.
Ms. Boston, in other words, we're talking about how we calculate the total time it takes to fill an order. So if the order is placed on Thursday, and most companies would count Thursday, Friday, and then start again on Monday, 3 days. But if we have to add the Saturdays and Sundays because there's no way to take that out, that shows as 5 days. So it's from a reporting perspective in terms of how quickly we can get goods to schools.
And not a dollar amount?
Not a dollar amount, no ma'am.
Ms. Johnson.
Hi, Mr. Miles.
Hi.
The board just got back Monday and Tuesday from the NSBA conference, and one of the places where I picked up information, I was unable to attend that particular one, was about what you do about purchasing. And it was about helping school districts in these economic times save money. So again, the question is coming up that you've been asked every year for, I don't know, going on 5 years now. Are we looking at actually sharing purchasing of common items along with the county? I guess we don't have any other agency we can partner with, but where are we on trying to get that done? Creating an MOU where we can all buy copy paper together and bathroom tissue and paper towels and soap, etc.
Remember the right agreements I just talked about? We have those available, and we utilize them, through and through. And we do quite a bit of it, not just with the county, but we do it with other school districts. For example, we performed a bid with Montgomery and Rundle and on a number of other school districts as it relates to testing. That was finalized, I think, sometime last July. And when it came back, we saved quite a bit of money because we all went in. So we're ahead of the game, but we have the tools in place so that we can, and we're utilizing those tools to make sure that we get through. And the other part of it is, it's a part of the BRIC Pact. We're part of that, and we're able to utilize those contracts. And it's all of the school districts. So in essence, we've taken advantage of that as well. In addition to nationwide, with a number of purchasing organizations nationwide, we've been able to utilize those contracts as well. So we're not necessarily just looking locally. We're looking to find the best advantage where it provides a larger cost savings to us. And that's really what we do.
Yeah. The one that was there, the newest, I don't know if you've heard, it's called Buy Board. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know whether you had that information.
We're part of that as well.
Because I made certain that I brought information back for the deputy. Thank you. My last item has to do with MBE. Where are we in terms of making certain that our outreach for MBEE, not only compliance, which I think we are in compliance, but in order to see if we can add and increase our MBE participation workshops. Too often we get, board members get emails from people on the saying, I'd like to know how can I interface with PGCPS in order to learn about your because I'd like to become a vendor. Well, of course, we always send it forward, but do we have any announced workshops where it is an opportunity for outside business people to come to engage with us and to become part of our vending process?
Miss Yvette Williams, she's in the back. She's our MB coordinator, and she's been to numerous workshops. Not only that, but we conduct workshops for within each of our respective areas that have major purchases, and that usually goes on 2 or 3 times a year. In addition, she probably attends a minimum of 2 to 3 workshops every other week to engage vendors. We just went through a number of it as it relates to Doswell Brooks. We just went through a workshop as it relates to the the minority business conferences in
we
Baltimore.
Are offering these workshops, or we are attending.
We're
or both?
attending some, but when we say we're attending, we have a table there where the companies can interact, and then we have, as I've indicated, we have workshops that we have in-house that we send out to vendors, or there's an announcement on the radio that says, vendors, please come for this particular event because of X, Y, Z. Okay. It could be for a number of reasons. For example, I think we've had a couple with the IT department. And as a matter of fact, we're going to be participating with them pretty soon on another one. So for the most part, we do this throughout the year, and we're consistent with it month after month, year after year. So
I think it would be very nice if we could get an announcement of you, because you do it by a year-long calendar.
Absolutely.
It would be very nice to get that so we will know. So if people ask, we can say, well, did you get the calendar?
And we do quite a bit with the county. It comes, they have this weekly or biweekly conference dealing with so many different topics, and we participate with them.
Mr. Burrows?
Thank you, Mr. Miles, for your presentation. I think the numbers for MBE and county participation are really impressive. Ms. Johnson actually covered my questions in regards to MBE outreach, and I would be interested in hosting a workshop with you in your office because I'm sure you do have workshops, but if I don't know, then I can assure you that the people in my district, are not aware. And we all have mailing lists, and we all are, community leaders, and we would be willing to partner with you. I'm willing to partner with you to make sure that we have people attend these sessions. And so I'll send an email to you to work that out.
We'll prepare a list for the superintendent.
Yeah, and I think what would be helpful, Mr. Burrows, is a list of who attends, not a list of who attends, but the numbers of individuals who attend, and then providing for the board that information, along with a calendar before the announcements, and so that we give a year-long calendar. And we welcome your participation at any of those events.
I started to send over to Ms. Harrison a policy that would require a certain percentage of MBE participation, but I believe you're already meeting your goals in regards to that. Are there any other policy suggestions that you would like to see the board do to support your work?
I think, the idea of just leading the effort of educational excellence supports, gives us what we need. And so we do that through the superintendent, and that's really the important piece for us.
And I think the way to think about it, Mr. Burrows, is the work actually is in support of the policy. And so as we construct the policies, we have to then define our administrative procedures to make sure we're in support of that. And your policy already speaks to a pretty significant requirement with respect to MBE, and we're really proud of our numbers. And because you referenced Ms. Johnson, I want to come back to a point that you made as well. I think there's also a misnomer that by partnering and purchasing with the county on certain purchases, that it would yield a cost savings to us. And it really is, what we found is it's more of a cost savings to them because we buy more than they do. Now, some of these consortiums, however, these purchasing consortiums like the one that you mentioned, COG is another one, and we're involved in quite a few of those that allow us to go either regionally or nationally. And now school systems and state departments of education are actually entering into some of these consortiums to look at things like textbooks, technology, and you know that there are two programs for the new assessment with respect to Common Core, and states have stepped on one side or the other, either the PARC assessment or the smarter, balanced assessment. But we're also looking at consortia to purchase those types of assessments as well, so that, number one, we can define what the product is so it's more responsive to the needs of the assessment, and number two is really to take advantage and actually drive the conversation with respect to market and the market value, to drive that conversation as opposed to just responding to what textbook companies or assessment companies create.
Madam Chair, if I could ask you to ask Dr. Height to provide us information about these different consortia and how that's affecting our bottom line in terms of money saving. Thank you.
I'll be in the follow-up to the meeting. Ms. Boston?
How is the public, I know you're saying you have a number of workshops, or you put on a number of workshops and you attend workshops. How is the public actually notified when we're getting this information out to the public about these workshops taking place? Like for different vendors who might want to participate in those workshops. I mean, how's that process done?
There are a number of ways in which we engage the public. The first of which is we go through the list of agencies, if you will, or agencies, for example, with contractors, there's a contractor association. So we would go through the contractor association. Number two, we would, if it's part of the regional thing, normally it's over the radio. If we have a list, we'll send it out via the list. We'll send it out via the email. So whatever avenues are available for us to notify them of the pending function, we use it, we utilize it. So there are just so many different ways, and it really depends on the list of contractors or the list of vendors that you're looking to engage. Part of the Baltimore-Washington Consortium, that's always on the radio. Whatever that we go through the governor's business office, they can send out a blog with emails and whatnot. So there are so many different ways that we engage them. And if for example, we have we just went through the Doswell Brooks, and there were we had a list of vendors and a list of contractors. We went through that as well, and we went through the association. So it depends on specifically what it is, but we try to use all areas or all media outlets that we can.
When we do the bidding process, or how is that done for our big contracts? Do we, bear with me, I might be asking something that you might have already covered, and being a new board member, this is really new to me seeing this data. When you're submitting for your bids, is there a 3-bid process for your big contracts like you do in most businesses, and like when our big contracts are up, do we go back to that bidding process where we go and solicit bids, or?
Yeah, we have normally all of our bids come with a bid list. Sometimes from the department, but sometimes we have it internally. For example, our vendor system has about 28,000 vendors that are active, and a number of them are coded as such, though, that if we needed to extract them for a particular bid, we would be able to do that from time to time. The other part is that everything that we post on our website also gets posted on the state's website, and their vendors also get the email that says this is now available. We do the same. And so, in essence, there's a outpouring of emails for vendors that have been registered for a particular solicitation. And through that process, we also have what we call a pre-bid proposal conference, where we invite, those vendors are invited to come in. And other vendors are also engaged by hearing about those pre-proposal conferences. And in essence, what happens after that is that some of them partner together to put together a bid. So in essence, through the state, through our county, through our website, we're able to touch all of those vendors that are registered in our system.
But do they submit 3 bids? I mean, I know our time is up.
And Mr. Miles will address that question, but just if you want to learn a lot about what Mr. Miles does, he's put together a great purchasing manual right on his website, right on the purchasing website. So I just encourage you to download that, and that walks you through what is required for bidding, what is required to, go to the board for approval, all that. It's a good document, but I'll let Mr. Miles
But I
go
don't
ahead
feel
and
like you
explain.
answered my question. I'm
Yeah.
asking you, are there 3 bids? Is there a 3-bid process? In other words, do you look at all 3, like you look at the lowest of your 3 bids? Or, that's what I'm asking you, David.
That's the responses. So the bid has a closing date.
Okay.
And then that closing date, if it's an RFP, we just record the information and then we submit it to the department. If it's a bid, we actually read the bids. We actually sit there and we read the bids and we record it. And the vendors are also there and they listen. And so they need, at that time, if they're there, they know whether they've won or not. And so then they only have to get through a process of a review process to make sure that they can supply us with those products or those services. So the 3-bid, I'm not sure what the 3-bid process, but it's a review process that entails the selection process afterwards.
It's no minimum requirement that we receive 3 bids, Ms.
Okay.
Boston. I think that's what you're asking.
But you look at the lowest price.
But we look at all the bids that we accept. Sometimes we may have well over 3. Sometimes we may only have 2. Sometimes we may only get 1. But
Right.
it's no minimum of 3 that's required.
Yeah, the only that guy's absolutely correct. The only issue is with 1 bid, because it's very difficult to judge whether or not you're getting the best price with 1 bid. So a lot of times we may extend the bid for 5 days to give somebody else the opportunity. But if we really need the product, we'll do the extension. If not, then we'll do a little more research and see if we can ride something, a contract that may have a better price, if it will.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Beck?
Mr. Miles, how do you track or measure loss prevention in terms of items that come into the warehouse and go out of the warehouse? I know that periodically we've had some concerns about items being lost.
Yeah, we had one incident where there was a computer missing, but we typically have millions of dollars each year in and out of that warehouse. And for the most part, we have 2 reports that we generate. And actually, we can generate them over the course of a monthly period if we need to. And that report basically tells us that, what the usage is. We can compare that usage to what was ordered and whatever's left on the shelf. So that's one of the ways we do that. And we do that typically quarterly, or we could do it monthly. But for the most part, we do it quarterly and semi-annually, and then annually as required by as a part of our performance objectives, and is also part of the closure of our CAFR, Comprehensive Financial Audit. We're starting to tighten up procedures a little more after the misplacing of that computer, and one of the things that we've also done is we're also looking at our cameras a little more. We've installed cameras throughout the building, so in essence, these will give us additional eyes, if you will, and that hopefully will stem the concern that was developed from that one missing laptop.
Thank you. In terms of minority participation, the women participation, so 4.63 female is 95.37 non-female. That to me kind of jumps out. So where where are we in terms of trying to boost that number?
Last year, when the executive cabinet decided to add this as a measure, throughout the first 3 quarters, we were at 3.1, 3.2, and that fourth quarter came in, and it was way up. So in essence, we're not concerned about it because we know that there are a number of prime vendors and contractors that are female-owned companies, and we know that during this time of the year is really when the contract work gets out, and so we've already seen an increase in it. As a matter of fact, we're gonna go back and take a look at that third quarter data, and then we'll be able to give you a clearer picture about that particular metric. We know that we're going to be able to achieve that because, we think we have a good measure for that, and we think we have a good strategy for making sure that that happens.
And what do women usually bid on? What are the companies that are usually
Construction.
out there?
The one area where we've had some challenges is roofing, and we've had to remove women companies from that bid because there aren't too many. But what we're finding out is that there are some female architectural firms. There are some female construction and firms a lot of subs, if you will. Right. And so we're looking at the areas of painting, site work, and general contracting, some of the plumbing. We're trying to engage more and more. And we'll have a workshop soon that will probably look just at that group. But we don't just have to look at it. We have to also look at it in the IT area as well, because those are where the big dollars are, and that's where we think we can also make some impact.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Beck. Mr. Armwood?
Thank you, sir. You mentioned the loss of a computer in the warehouse, evidently. What about loss prevention in schools? I've heard stories about computers walking, and we have issues perhaps with inventory in schools. So what are our controls, and what can we put in place for loss prevention in the schools?
There are 2 things that purchasing does. It's more of an accounting function. The actual inventory is maintained in the accounting area. But there are 2 things that we do, and that is when a purchase order for inventory is developed, it automatically goes to the accounting area, so for them to include it as a part of the inventory system. And at the end of the year, what they do is they reconcile that. We're also working with the IT department as it relates to computers to make sure that everything comes through our warehouse now, so that there is an accounting before it gets to the school, and there's a tracking mechanism in place for computers. And that's something that's new that we're just beginning to engage ourselves in.
Does that include furniture, bookcases, chairs, tables, so forth?
Furniture is maintained in our area. We typically have the whole listing, and because of the cost of furniture, for example, a chair may only be $50 or $25. Typically, we don't engage in that much of a...
some of the office chairs and so forth can be several $100s. Is that right?
Yeah. And those that are $700 are added to the inventory for the accounting, as a part of the accounting piece.
So that inventory is maintained. Is that inventory maintained at the school, and then, or is it maintained in your warehouse?
No, it's not maintained in the warehouse. It's maintaining at the school and in the accounting area.
Okay.
So just to follow up, Mr. Arm, but where we do struggle a little bit is, so like as Mr. Miles said, as soon as it's purchased the first time, it's automatically entered into our inventory system in Oracle over in accounting. The issue then becomes, though, when that item, let's say, gets transferred from school A to school B, we have a manual process right now that's, you have to fill out paperwork that then goes to fixed assets, who then will change, okay, this piece of furniture was in school A and school B. We are working with IT to try and automate that. Unfortunately, we're running into cost situations, but we're looking internally with IT to work out how we can automate this whole process to ensure we have the inventory is properly coded into the right places.
Do you all use the hand scanners?
Mr. Ahmed, we're looking at, and I'm going to have Mr. Watts answered that question specifically, because we're starting to look at these devices, but we're also trying to change what has been a practice. And that practice is, has been, that when an order is placed, it's shipped to one of 227 places. That's how many offices and schools we have. And so we leave it up to those 227 places to tag, to inventory, and to track all of these products. And what we're trying to do is actually have a central repository, if you will, so that we are getting the item into the inventory first, and then we're able to track it electronically throughout the 227 locations. And Mr. Watts will, and this is with a view towards really looking at loss prevention and what you just described.
And I have one question. Do we have a dollar amount on the amount of loss that we experienced each year?
We don't, and we don't. We have some estimates, and they're pretty high. We had some estimates just around lost textbooks a couple of years ago that were pretty significant. And one of the reasons we began looking at this loss prevention strategy was really to make sure, number one, we understood where all of these materials and resources were going, and number two, had a system to track so that we are able to say, here is the amount that we're losing from one year to the next, or from one site to the other.
Wouldn't it almost be a matter of orders are coming in for inventory that you know should be durable inventory? Is that counted as a loss? You know, you should be able to subtract, I would think, from orders for new or replacement items from what should have been in the location.
Yeah, we do track that. I'm not sure we have that today. We do have that, Mr. Elmwood, and those are for the reported items and the items that must be reordered when it's before the time to reorder them. But I want, if we could, just for a second, Mr. Watts, to spend some time talking about the system we're looking at.
Sure. Mr. Elmwood, we've been working on an asset management system today. We have it in operation. We've been testing it out with some of our newer devices that we've been purchasing. And our goal is that we're going to start with the technology pieces, which are pretty expensive pieces of equipment. And they're going to be coming into a central location. They'll be barcoded. They'll be set up for the schools and shipped out. And we have everything available so that the technicians in the schools and offices will be able to go in and look at their inventories for all the schools. Okay, and what they'll be able to do with that is, in the event that you know, they can see those things, they can't delete those items, but they can view the inventory that's supposed to be in each one of the buildings. As Mr. Miles and Mr. Stansky had mentioned, Oracle automatically provides that information to accounting. So everything that's purchased, if you will, they do have a way to log that. And we have to match that to the asset management system. So that's what we're beginning to do. We have a long way to go. Obviously, we're going to start with the technology pieces and work towards you know, the other expensive equipment that we do purchase throughout the district.
Thank you. I see no other buzzers. Thank you for your presentation. Mr. Miles.
Good afternoon, board members. My name is Dennis Hirsch, Director of Payroll Services, and I will present the information about that department, and later on I will explain briefly how we're merging payroll services with the benefits department also. We have two primary core services right now: correct and on-time pay and fiscal accountability, and fiscal accountability has three secondary core services. We think that we affect employee productivity because if we do a bad job, then teachers and other staff have issues out there when they're really supposed to be focusing on something else. So the better job we do, the less they have to worry about what we don't do or do wrong. So that's the way we connect that. We collaborate with just about every office, school in the county because we have payroll timekeepers and payroll time approvers in those areas. Looking at the dashboard, the first core service, correct and on-time pay, we strive for 100%. We Our target is 99.6% this year. Dr. Height challenged us to change that to 100% all the time, and we're going to do that. We're on target at this point about 99.5%. And there's when we miss that a little bit, for about every percent or tenth of a percent, that's about 25 or 30 people that we actually have to do some check work after the time cards are rolled over into the pay system. And so we take that period of time before payroll is done to get their check prepared and to them. They just don't always get it like they want it, like direct deposit, or they may have to pick it up, or it may be sent to them. We hardly ever fail to pay anyone, and when that does occur, we work drastically to get that corrected. So we're on target there. The employee satisfaction survey is being compiled and should be out soon for review. In the fiscal accountability area, there are three secondary core services. Time card approval, our target was 92%, and we are at 86% right now, and that we won't make that one this year. We won't make that target. There was a pretty low approval rate in August, and that was because there was a failure of the time card workflow process to get the time cards from the timekeeper to the time approver. And that percent, when you plug it into statistics, just makes it impossible to reach that 86 or 92%. But we are moving along pretty good now, and you'll see a little bit more evidence of that later on. In the payroll services department, our resources are about 14 people working on correct and on-time pay, and about 4 people working on fiscal accountability, and a total of 18. We're losing one of those in next year's budget, but we still think we can keep our standards up. Wanted to show you a little bit on a longitudinal comparison for about 5 years, and this one is correct and on-time pay. And you can see it started out fairly low when we started keeping statistics on this, 99.1%, 98.9%, and so on. And now we very regularly are above 99.5% every pay period, except when we have a little issue. But we think we'll make this target this year, and then we'll strive for 100%. On time card approval, when we started keeping stats on this, we were in the mid-60s, and now we're regularly averaging above in the low to mid-90s, and we're working hard to get up over that. We have 300 offices and schools with 300 plus timekeepers, 300 plus time approvers. So those are where some of our challenges come from. Sometimes they're out, sometimes they're sick, sometimes some time doesn't get entered and then it's sent to us and we have to enter it. But you can see the trend line is going up pretty good. So we're pleased with that. We're happy that we're making progress. In fiscal accountability, what the core service or the measurement is zero tax penalties. We don't want to get any tax penalties. We have one open-ended out there right now of about $27,000. We work with 4 jurisdictions, the IRS, the government of Maryland, the government of Virginia, and the government of the District of Columbia. So every once in a while, we'll miscommunicate, and that's what this one was, and they have verbally abated it for us, but we haven't gotten the credit on paper yet. In the end, what we'll probably do is just take the credit with one of our tax submissions. So we'll get that off of there. Under the third one, under fiscal accountability, is zero audit findings, and right now we're doing well. We haven't had any findings surface this year yet, and we think that we're in pretty good shape for no findings to surface in any of the audit reports. And again, we'll get some more internal service information about the customers when that is compiled. We are operating at a fairly high level now, we think, and where we're at on correct and on-time pay, it's just a constant quality improvement issue with us, fine-tuning procedures, communicating, and a little more automation whenever we find the opportunity to do that. So that's what the findings and the drivers and the actions are all about with that. Under fiscal accountability, it's very similar. Fine-tuning our procedures, identifying better procedures, communicating, establishing controls, and trying to find ways to automate more. The same thing is true of tax compliance and financial reporting. So where we're at right now is just trying to fine-tune everything we've established over the last number of years and keep the percentages moving up. Now, what's happening right now is we're merging the payroll department with the benefits department, or reorganizing it. And one thing about that is that benefits has a great effect on correct and on-time pay as well, because all of the deductions are taken on the check, on the right-hand side of the check, and sometimes if they're not correct, then the pay for the employee is not correct. So we think that we'll stand a good chance of improving that correct and on-time pay rate with this change as well. We've established a third core service. It's called competitive benefits. And if you look down under the three other boxes, you'll see that under the payroll systems and analysis part, we've added a benefits accountability responsibility that goes with the time and leave and tax compliance and financial reporting. Under payroll operations and procedures, we're blending some of those existing positions in with our time and leave reporting groups, establishing teams that now include life and health insurance and pension and retirement. And then the third one, this is the new part of the payroll and benefits services, is benefits programs and services. And the effort there is to improve customer service through some of those issues that are those items you see listed 1 through 4, as well as survey other school districts who we compete with to attract teachers and retain teachers and other staff members and determine whether or not we are, in fact, through a survey process, putting out there a competitive benefits program. And the transition is well structured at this point and organized, and we think we'll get it all set up by July 1. And I would be glad to answer questions.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson?
Thank you. Just one with regard to time cards. The other services in this division, we have nearly no areas that we're getting, consistent complaints. But the board has to look at, oftentimes, appeals. We have to look at information coming from the auditor. And one of the things is about time card. I know you all are going over and stressing this with more and more supervisors, et cetera. How are we doing that repetitiveness of the same type of error, card not signed, dates not accounted for absence? How is that going?
Well, with the approval rates that we're getting right now, we would have sometimes anywhere from a dozen to maybe a dozen and a half organizations not getting all of their time cards approved on an electronic basis. That doesn't mean they're not reviewing them and not signing all and reviewing and signing all the leave requests and not looking at the overtime and those kinds of things. They're doing it at the site, but for whatever reason, they don't get them approved to the electronic time card.
Well, is that a technology glitch or is that a human glitch?
Most of the times it's a human glitch. I identified one technology glitch. We're down to a handful of folks now because we've been pushing and recording and keeping track and sharing that information. So we think that we're improving, and we communicate all of that information to the executive staff as well, and they're working hard with their respective organizations that report to them to get it taken care of. Occasionally, what I thought you were going to ask, how does the correct and on-time pay, how are we working on that? We're at a very high rate, and what causes that sometimes is an error or an omission on a time card, and it's not caught in time for the timekeeper and time approver to get it corrected. Then they send it to us, and after the time cards have been already accepted, they send it to us, and we have to work to get that check adjusted so it is correct. And that causes it to be taken out of a direct deposit method of payment at that point. It has to be a regular check, so we consider that to be late, even though we can get it to them on Friday afternoon. Or it causes us to mail it out, or it causes the employee to come in and pick it up. So we oftentimes are down to the error as an omissions type things that 60 to 70 people, that's a bad week, and sometimes we've made it down to about 35. That's a really good week.
And so, well, thank you for that detailed explanation. But timekeepers are people, are they not?
Yes.
This is their job descriptor. Is
Sure.
that not true?
Mm-hmm. Yes. It's part of their job description.
Okay.
They're oftentimes the bookkeeper for the school. They're oftentimes the principal secretary. And you have to imagine we're asking them to do sometimes 2 or 3 things on the busiest school day of the week. And so we're looking at maybe changing that. We're trying to extend that period a little bit. We're experimenting with that right now so they have a little better chance to do their job a little better.
So the feedback you're getting, there may be some contributory factors that the system's oversight could look at that may assist with this? Is that what
I think there are. I think there are some human errors that perhaps are the fault of the person once in a while, and sometimes repeatedly, and we try to deal with them too. But oftentimes we're asking them to do a superhuman effort on a day that they have to devote a lot of time to other things. So we're trying to solve that.
I would be curious to actually look at definition superhuman. What does it look like? We all are working very hard, everybody, and so it is of a, again, I leave it to you all. It is a concern because clearly when time cards are not right, we're either overpaying or underpaying people, and that is payroll is not accurate, and that goes into the overall negative for our system, and we need to be careful. But I would say that people whose job it is to be careful and meticulous, it is the expectation that that job will be done error-free. And when those rare occasions occur, we should be able to explain that and should be able to move forward. But superhuman, yeoman, let's kind of rethink that definition of the job.
I won't use that term again.
Thanks.
But a typical high school, for example, huge school with 200-plus employees, and they're trying to wrap up the time cards by noon on Friday, so the the principal has time to approve them later that day. And all that goes on in a high school today on Fridays, which is they have the athletic events coming up, they have the plays and everything else coming up.
But again, I did 35 years in a high school, so I know
you
it's
understand.
frenetic.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, Dr.
Mr. Hirsch, in terms of the percentage and in terms of the percentage with errors, what does that represent with respect to the numbers of paychecks?
Well, we typically do about 22,000 paychecks. That includes the substitutes, which is in and of itself a tough group to get everything accurate. But we do about 22,000 checks. So what we're counting in that 99.5 or the 5% that's later are incorrect, and we do get them correct. That's about, if it's 99.9, we're talking about 35 check. If it's 99.5, we're talking about 150 checks perhaps. And so we get those correct because those corrections come into us between the time that the time card is submitted and the time we have to get the check out to the staff.
And thank you, Mr. Hirsch. And one of the reasons I wanted to make sure we got that on the record was because I'm trying to get to 100%, Ms. Johnson, in terms of error rate, just trying to eliminate errors altogether. But I do think that inside of this dynamic, particularly in some cases where we have individuals who are responsible for payroll absent and having only 35 checks that are inaccurate, I think that the work that we've done to really improve on that process is starting to pay dividends. The other part of this is the training component, and we've talked about this before, I think in this meeting, the oversight meeting, where individuals actually have to demonstrate proficiency before they are released from the training. So in order for you to actually do payroll, you no longer just go through the training, you also have to demonstrate proficiency that you are familiar enough with the system in order to do that. And we're taking the same approach with master scheduling and some other things where there are chances for operator error, if you will.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Kong, and I am directing the Fiscal Compliance Office. We are, I'll go here, an office of 4. And to explain the core services and actually what's going to be happening to this office in the next fiscal year, we'll start with just a little bit of context. Our office has been evolving in the roles that we're supposed to be taking on. I think what you're used to and what you heard in the past about fiscal compliance is that they took a primary role in implementing position control, that they were supporting audits, both in primarily external audits. When we came on and started taking another look at the core services, we were essentially charged with kind of shifting our roles and doing a lot more project-based work in support of Mr. Stansky. And so now, the 2 big charges coming into this year were first to look at the resource allocation process, so the way that we are funding our schools and the way that we are managing who and how we are managing those funds. So that's the first core service really focuses on that area, and specifically we take a look at, we're using the analysis that we're doing as well as Education Resource Strategies, who did a presentation earlier this year around equitable funding of schools. This is all connected also to the student-based budgeting formula and the new system that we are currently developing. And so we take a lot of that work that we're doing with ERS as well as internally, and we're looking at a change in this resource allocation process. The second thing we were charged with was to take a look at our own processes within business management services and essentially just to see how we could improve just internal business processes like workflows, as well as just do better by way of producing more clear and usable data reports, financial reports, and position reports having to do with position data, specifically to help support decisions. So an example of that is like one big push right now is for the early retirement analysis. We're kind of we have an individual who's helping to kind of conduct the data side of that to support the decisions. So those are the 2 big areas that you see as far as our core services. Next year, as Mr. Stansky mentioned, our office is going to be split, the individuals. So 2 individuals, myself and another budget tech, are going to be continuing the project-based work with ERS and student-based budgeting in the Office of the CFO. And then we also have some support, 2 staff, 2 positions going to the budget office, again, helping to work on that data analysis and data support side. Our core services, first we're going to look at the dashboard for core service 1. What I'm just going to really focus on is, again, this is project-based work, so what we measure our success on is the completion of, we set out major milestones for these projects with ERS and the student-based budgeting initiative, and so every month we check in on that process to see how we're doing. Some of the holdups that you see, particularly in February and March, are around just some milestones that we've missed around delivering enrollment projections and some of the data to the schools for the pilot process, which we're now working on. We've gotten those out, but there have been some delays, and we're working through that. The other big area is that is actually at risk. So one of the big objectives or outcomes of this core service is, as you can see, the percentage of the general fund allocated to school operating resources. This is a very broad outcome that we've defined. It essentially says that we want to look at, when we started this core service, we talked about any cost savings or resource allocations that we can identify. We want to overall make sure that they are making their way to school operating resources, and so that we would take a look at where we are today, the school budgets as a portion of our total budget, and where we want to be tomorrow. What's happened is especially with the budget reductions coming up for this coming year, we haven't been able to, we know that the overall budget is at risk, but another way of looking at it is also the proportion, how school operating resources were hit proportionally to the overall budget. We weren't able to make any increases, but it does give us, it gave us a lot to think about as far as how we want to think about what we want to measure going into next year. And I'm going to point you to the next slide, which talks about how we're going to take that outcome and really look at a more specific goal, which I think we can talk about more concretely. And then hopefully as we meet this goal, we can also meet the overall outcome that we just talked about. So here is the goal that we're trying to be more specific about and intentional about is increasing school-controlled resources with student-based budgeting. And so this is just a general flow chart with very high-level numbers. But just to give you a picture, I just want you to follow the blue line. And starting from the general operating fund, you can see that the school breaks out into school-based funds and non-school-based funds. And then of the school-based funds, there's a unrestricted pot of money that the decisions, once we make the decisions about what is unlocked of that unrestricted pot, what unlocked means is that those are the funds that the schools will receive as part of their student-based budgeting allocation. And so it's kind of a long way to say we want that bottom SBB fund to be as large as possible, both by putting more dollars into school resources and also making sure that we are opening up more flexibilities for principals and school leaders within those school resources. So we want that bottom right box to increase over time. And I think as we report and look at metrics for next year and keep building upon that, that's going to be one in particular that we're going to keep a very close eye on. The next core service that we're looking at here is core service 2. So this is more of the business and service improvement side. Again, our approach here is mainly by providing more meaningful financial reports, which means basically working with the Oracle system and seeing and making sure that we're extracting data and creating simple reports that help our account managers and that help Mr. Stansky make decisions. Some examples of reports that they're working on collaboratively are the MBE encumbrance report, some Title I expenditures reports, and you know, that process is just an ongoing process and it continues. And when it's in the budget office, I think it'll be even more effective just because I think it comes in direct support of what they need. Another main function is the organizational change requests. So every time we have a reorg, both mainly in the central office, which we've had a lot up and coming for the next fiscal year, that requires a lot of following the procedures, but also just making sure that the position data and the employee data are updated appropriately. That's another function that our office takes on. So what we look at is just making sure that we follow the process and also are doing it in a timely manner. Along with those things you'll see things around making sure that overall within BMS our administrative procedures are not just up to date, but communicated out. So we're still working on that. And that's going to be very critical, especially just doing a whole nother wave of updates when we do actually come out with the new student-based budgeting system. A lot more controls and policies I think we're going to have to take a closer look at. And overall, the way that we're looking to measure all of those things are account manager satisfaction. So account managers are the managers in the central office as well as the principals in the schools. So what I think Dr. Hirsch mentioned that there is an overall survey going out for BMS, and what we're planning on doing is actually just making sure that we have some questions around, are you receiving the data that you need in a timely manner? When you have to execute a reorg, are you satisfied with that process? And so when that does come out, and we're forming it, that that's going to be one big measure of if we've been effective or not. Here are just, again, like with the other groups, some findings and drivers and next steps for us. We know we have some things to do with student-based. I mentioned with the way that we look at the general fund dollars put towards school operating resources. Just to touch on, I think what's related to both of these is that a big next step for our office is to move. We're currently piloting student-based budgeting, but I think there's a lot of work to be done around stakeholder engagement. And as we're solidifying some of the elements of the system with the pilot schools, we have the 8 pilot schools that we're working with very closely right now. The next step for us is really to focus in the spring and summer on just getting out beyond our core team and doing work with the board as well as our partners in labor. And eventually, once we kind of get that layer worked out, then we have more to do with our parents and community. Some of our principals have been very good about starting to talk about this process with the parents in their school teams. So we're hearing about how that's going so far, but yeah, that's going to be a very big push come summertime when we roll this out to all schools. That's it for me. Any questions?
Thank you. This summer coming up, your last statement, the rollout for this summer?
The rollout is going to be for this coming fiscal year. All schools are going to start planning for the next fiscal year, their budgets. So what we're doing with a small group of pilot schools right now, it's going to be like a year-long process, actually.
So I'm curious, Dr. Height, in terms of, I assume that you're using the managed performance empowerment theory of action to help drive this work. So how do you, in terms of the 8 pilot schools, on the section on slide 42, how have you already determined those unlocked categories for the schools?
We actually haven't determined the unlocked categories, and that part will be determined. Oh, maybe we have. Okay. You want to talk about that, Matt or Jeff?
Well, I'll start. We've spent, I think, a good portion of the winter working with the executive cabinet to pilot this process, essentially, which is to look at our budget in terms of specific position types. A lot of it's in positions, so what types of school-related school positions, nurses, classroom teachers, do we think that school leaders should have the discretion over? And so that process was, we have a first cut of what is unlocked and what's locked, which was just a first look at what our leadership team worked on and kind of put a series of votes on. And then we also had a committee with the principals to get some insight on that as well.
Can you give an example? Is it strictly personnel?
No, it's so one, the supplies and materials side or the non-personnel side are, it's not too different from what they have discretion over already. The school operating, I don't know if it's the funds that they can already budget. So like for an elementary school, it's about $40,000 on par of those other supplies and materials.
Ms. Jacobs, the locked and unlocked, basically the criteria we used is if it's a mandated program and there's very little flexibility, we generally locked it. For example, special education is locked. They cannot really mess with changes in staffing because that's federally mandated and it's IEP driven. So that's an example. We tried to unlock, and we also locked some positions that they didn't want to mess with, like nurses. Principals don't want to deal with that, so we just locked that position. But for almost all other positions, we unlocked to give principals the opportunity to make decisions. However, we also gave the pilot principals the COMAR regulations and the expectations for how to deliver service. So even though they might have some flexibility, there are external rules that they have to live by.
And the checks and balances for that occurs how? To make sure that throughout the process that, they're in compliance, if you will, and where they need help, because it's ultimately when this is really rolled out, I assume principals are going to need a lot more help in managing how that works.
Absolutely. We had a meeting yesterday. First of all, the pilot schools that we chose were chosen deliberately. These are principals who are high functioning, understand schedules, understand how to use staff. So we're taking the best as the pilot. And we had a meeting yesterday that was transformative. The principal at William Hall was really struggling with a schedule, and we brought in a scheduling expert from the state, and they just laid it out on Post-it notes, and she was so excited to see how she could make this work, keep collaborative planning, the integrity of collaborative planning, and still use the existing staffing. Principal at Bowie High School had a transformative moment when she saw about making some adjustments to her schedule, how she could maximize staff. So it was a pretty exciting meeting, but we have the best minds working on it. You've anticipated my concern. Next year it'll be much tougher to roll this out across 200 schools.
So here is how I envision that, Madam Chair, and I envision, and this probably is why I made why I responded as I did, because as we're looking at the pilot, we're trying to find all of the pitfalls associated with student-based budgeting. Right. So by giving individuals the autonomy to make decisions, then what decisions become difficult to make based on the resources that they have. Moving forward, we're going to have to rely on the board to determine inside of our priorities or our core work what is locked and unlocked. And as we look at other districts, and Ms. Hathaway Beck and I heard this from a system that's doing this not too far from us, every spring prior to the next year, the Board of Education determines what those things are. And by doing that, it's emphasized inside of the budget, number one, and then number two, it is the strategy or the priority for the district as they move forward. So everything moves in that direction. And that's a little different than the managed performance empowerment theory of action that we started. This is more deliberately trying to devolve the decision-making to the individuals who are closest to the students with high expectations for accountability and pre-describing, if you will, the outcomes that are expected. Mm-hmm. So we're actually pre-describing what we're going to hold individuals accountable for with respect to outcomes. Here's how you get there. And here are all of the tools you need. This was never intended to circumvent statutory, regulatory, negotiated agreements. And so all of those things are in place. But as we move forward, we'd have to think about how do we build into the timeline what we propose as a set of priorities from the perspective of the board, and then that would determine essentially what is locked and unlocked.
Okay. It just sounds like an opportunity to have that discussion around empowerment, accountability, capacity, those kinds of things. Ms. Boston?
Do we have a list of the schools, the names of the schools, that the 8 schools that you're referring to? And also, are they distributed evenly throughout the districts?
No, they're not distributed evenly because this was by individuals who volunteered, Ms. Boston. So we wanted, this was to look at individuals who were very interested in taking on this as a pilot, and they're going to receive training. But I think even with not trying to do that, I think it's actually distributed across most of the areas. That wasn't intentional, it's just how it fell out.
Fairly. Yeah, we have all area offices represented and the high school consortium. So we have 2 high schools, 1 middle school, a K-8, and 4 elementary schools. So there's a little bit of clustering. I think like Kenilworth and Heather Hills both ended up applying and are participating in the program, but we'll get you that list. But we tried to make sure there was a spread both in terms of school type, size, demographics, all that.
So you will be giving us a list of the 8 schools, the names of the 8 schools?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Ms. Johnson?
Dr. Hyde, I'd like to begin on the end of Ms. Jacobs' question. We, of course, had, governing processes about management as MPE. Are you now saying to the board it is now time for us to look at that to see if we're going to shift and change it, or are we going to still be operating under MPE?
We're still operating under that general or broad theory of action, Ms. Johnson. It's how we're moving into that process that's different. And the difference is now through, at first we were just talking about a set of decisions, but we were still controlling all of the resources. So it's real hard to give individuals the flexibility to make decisions, but then we still control all of the resources. So how the decisions are being devolved, or how we're doing or devolving those decisions to schools is different than under the managed performance empowerment. It was more identified in the human capital paper, where we, as a district, were really looking at schools as the unit of change. We were trying to support schools from the perspective of central office, as opposed to creating these compliance-based structures.
Okay, and I understand that. I am saying I really think we need to look at our theory of action and what has evolved from that to determine if we need to look at our theory of action and maybe go to our theory of action 2 or 2.1, because we've been operating, and as we go out, at least I know as I go out, and I've been talking, different kinds of groups, and people say, well, how is it Prince George's does its work? I talk about this, and what does it mean at the school level? And so I think we really need to have a discussion about this, because we may need to do some more work and to rewrite.
I think so too, Ms. Johnson, but I think this is also a realization of the theory of action. So I think we're moving towards that theory of action finally. And I think we put that in place several years ago. This is more a move towards that than what we did with the autonomy zone.
And that's fine. I just want to make certain that as a body, we've spent a lot of time developing this, that we are doing, and it is providing what we need. The question that I have for you, and thank you, is at the bottom of the last page of your PowerPoint. You don't need to bring it up, where it says unlocked is $490 million. Now, what you have shown here is that $490 million spread across all of the schools of the system. That is the pot that's remaining that would be across the different schools in varying amounts, totaling $490 million for student-based budgeting to be done.
Yes, if we did, so this is a picture of what it would, obviously we're not rolling this out to all schools today, and the formula, our decisions on locked and unlocked could change that amount, but once that bottom right box is the dollars that would be distributed out to all all schools in the program.
And then there would be a formula to determine the characteristics of the school to determine how much of that final pot, that whatever that number is, would be.
Correct.
And would also there be information printed as to how, in their own disaggregation of their pot within that, would it follow a pattern that also we would be able to understand? You could do this, but you can't do that with it. You can do this, you can do that, but if you go this far, it's too far. Will they know? Right now you're doing it with 8 schools, but ultimately with the system, when we convert all of this, will all schools, school leadership teams, understand how to process their pot of money through the processes of student-based budgeting?
Yeah, it's a very, and I'll let Dr. Arbogast and Matt chime in on this, but my piece on this is that it is a very broad thing to take on as a principal, and what we're trying to do is to chunk it into digestible kind of pieces for them at the moment. So one thing that we're doing with these pilot schools is really working with them on what big questions do you have. Some of them actually, I think, know how to divide their dollars and manage their budgets and know COMAR and know a lot of the restrictions already. So what we're just kind of trying to extract from them is what are your big burning questions about how to, go from your allocation, your dollar allocation, instead of what you received in preset staffing allocation. What are the big needs and training and support that you need from us in BMS, from academics in terms of do I need to make sure that I offer PE and those types of things. And so we're getting those needs from them, and then as the pilot process goes on, we're also trying to create the boundaries for them. So I think the big thing that we've talked about is just create non-negotiable, like COMAR type things on the academic side. And then for budget, we're going to also have to, if there are spending boundaries or budget reallocation boundaries, we'll
I'm
put
going
those
to let
together.
you, because the bell has rung, and I just need Dr. Height to weigh in along with you as to, is there any school you anticipate, once we go to all system go, that may not have the capacity to do this? Do we have an ability to do governance over those schools? Thank you.
Yes.
And for some schools, Ms. Johnson, that would also be defined by the school design. So at some school designs, it may not be appropriate to apply this same mechanism for those particular schools. But that's why we want to look at schools that are of different sizes, that serve different populations, that represent elementary, middle, high, and K-8, so that we can determine where those possible issues may lie.
Okay. Mr. Armwood?
Thank you. I just had a aha moment. This appears to be an opportunity to increase or stimulate community, parent ownership in the schools and involvement. And is there a process, or have we talked about a process of the principals opening a discussion with the community about what the goals are, having input in this, and making these schools more community-based and more responsive to their individual communities?
Yes, is the answer to your question, Mr. Armwood, and not just principals. We're going to have to actually inform all of our communities, because this will be operating differently. This changes how budgets are done. This changes a lot of different conversations. But the whole purpose of this is to really devolve that decision-making into the school community and involve more of those individuals that are perhaps involved now in the school management and planning process, but really looking at that as a process to inform what schools do moving forward.
I mentioned principals in particular because the principals are the closest ones to the community, and this will force the principals, I hope, to talk to the community more. I know the community can't run the school, but that principal has to open up and be open about the decisions they're making, what their goals are, and get that input from the community. Not necessarily, I know we need to inform from our level.
And quite frankly, some of our principals are going to need help with that, and some of our communities are going to need help with that. And so that's why we are looking at this with just the 8-school model to start, and then moving it to the whole system in the following year, because we want to be able to have worked all of those things out, and it also changes our profile of who is serving in the principal's role, because now these things will become expectations for principals. It's not just I get to make all of the decisions without any voice from the community or staff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Armwood. Dr. Hyde, I would just close by saying that I think the point that Ms. Johnson and I are really trying to drive home on this is that the theory of action really was a lot of work, and it doesn't sound like what you're saying is different from that. It just sounds to me like maybe it's a good idea to pull that policy out and have Mr. Stansky read it again and really direct it and let that be the guide, because it really is the same thing, and it may need tweaking with regard to student-based budgeting directly, but I think all the components are really there.
And you're right, Madam Chair. And one of the things we started with when we started talking about student-based budgeting, actually we started a year ago when we started talking about performance-based budgeting.
Right.
We started with the theory of action.
Okay.
And we began with that theory of action and really talking about what's the structure that was in place supportive of or supported by that theory of action? And the answer was no. And then that's how we started really talking about performance-based budgeting, and then it moved to student-based budgeting.
Okay. And I think
so we have to make a better tie to that
right.
as we talk about this.
Because we really, I think, the expectation was that you walk into any school building and a principal can rattle off to you what the theory of action is.
Right.
Really be able to communicate it, which I think will help them communicate with their staff and the community in terms of what that means. Thank you. That concludes. Anything else you want to add, Dr. Height? Okay, great. So that concludes our presentation for finance, accounting, and budget. And Dr. Height, that brings us to budget consent agenda.
Budget consent agenda, Madam Chair, we have one item. That's the FY11 appropriation reassignments over $100,000 in major categories. And this is from the period of March 8th through April 7th.
Thank you, Dr. Height. Colleagues, is there a motion?
Move to accept.
Thank you, Ms. Beck. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been properly moved and second. Thank you, Mr. Burrows. That we accept item 7.1 under the budget consent agenda. All in favor? Any objections or abstentions? Seeing none, motion pass. Okay.
Fantastic. Next item, items of consent, and there are three items today. One is 8.1, grant reporting. That's the quarterly report that we provide for the board with respect to our grants. There are also two proclamations. Proclamation Administrative Professionals Day, which is April 27th, and proclamation commemorating May 2011 as National Asian Pacific American Heritage Month in Prince George's County.
Thank you, Dr. Height. Colleagues, I'll entertain a motion. Thank you, Ms. Eubanks. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. It's been properly moved and second that we accept the items 8.1, 2, and 3 under consent agenda. All in favor? Any objections or abstentions? Seeing none, motion passed. Mr. Armwood, if you would please read the proclamation acknowledging Administrative Professionals Day.
Proclamation, Administrative Professionals Day. Whereas Prince George's County Public Schools celebrates Administrative Professionals Day 2011 to recognize secretaries, administrative assistants, receptionists, and other administrative support professionals, and whereas Administrative Professionals Day, formerly known as Secretary's Day, was created in 1952 by Harry F. Kempfuss of Young and Rubicam in conjunction with the National Secretaries Association, now known as the International Association of Administrative Professionals, and whereas Harry F. Kempfuss promoted the values and importance of the job of administrative support professionals and created the holiday in recognition of the importance of administrative support professionals, and whereas 2011 Administrative Professionals Day theme this year, celebrate all professional office professionals. Downsizing has forced us all to pull together and work harder, not just administrative professionals in the workplace. The International Association of Administrative Professionals, IAPP, recognizes the hard work and sacrifice from everyone, and whereas Prince George's County Public Schools recognizes administrative support professionals in their professional roles and promotes opportunities for professional learning and growth. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Education of Prince George's County and the Superintendent of Schools are proud to recognize Administrative Professionals Day, April 27, 2011, as a day to observe. In honor of this observance, we encourage all school administrators to take part in recognizing their administrative support staff. Be it finally resolved that the Board of Education of Prince George's County hereby calls upon all school administrators to honor this observance with appropriate activities during the week of April 24 through April 30, 2011.
Thank you, Mr. Armwood. Ms. Eubanks, would you please read into the record the proclamation acknowledging National Asian Pacific American Heritage Month?
Resolution, National Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. This year's theme is Emerging Together. Hereas during the month of May, we honor the achievements and contributions of more than 15 million Asian and Pacific Island Americans who represent over 25 Asian and Pacific Island groups who have migrated to this country, including Bangladesh, Burmese, Cambodia, Chinese, Filipinos, Hmong, Indian, Indonesian, Japanese, Korean, Laotian, Malaysian, Pakistani, Sri Lankan, Taiwanese, Thai, Vietnamese, and a variety of Asian Pacifics from the Hawaiian Islands, Polynesian Islands, and New Zealand. Whereas, since the earliest days of America, people from all cultures have traveled to our nation seeking the promise of freedom, opportunity, and justice, and as an integral part of our society, Americans of Asian and Pacific heritage share in the pursuit of this American dream. And whereas today, Asian and Pacific Island Americans are leaders in such fields as public service, business, government, science, education, athletics, and the arts. Their love of family and community and their hard work has helped to uphold our nation for many generations. And whereas diversity represents one of the greatest strengths of this nation, we must continue to strive to ensure that all Americans have the opportunity to reach their full potential. By recognizing the accomplishments and contributions of these Americans, we celebrate the importance of inclusion in building a brighter future for all of our citizens. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Education of Prince George's County hereby honors Asian and Pacific Island Americans for their many contributions to our country and our culture by recognizing the month of May 2011 as Asian Pacific American Heritage Month in Prince George's County, Maryland, and public schools. Be it finally resolved that the Board of Education of Prince George's County hereby calls upon all school administrators, educators, students, and citizens of Prince George's County to honor this observance with appropriate programs, ceremonies, and activities.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Eubanks. Okay, that concludes our proclamations and items 8.1 to 8.3 on the consent agenda. Dr. Height?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are 2 items for new business: establishment of Excellence in Education Foundation, the Schools and Board of Education 2011-2012 meeting calendar.
Thank you. Colleagues, motion? Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Thank you, Ms. Baxter. Probably moved in second that we accept 2 items, 9.5 and 6, as first readers. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any objections or abstentions? Seeing none, motion passed. Colleagues, we have 1 registered speaker for this afternoon, and it is on the item of unfinished business. Mr. David Kahn, if you would please come forward.
That the board is considering public participation policy at an afternoon meeting when the public really can't attend. So if you're really interested in public participation and comment at your meetings, you won't have these afternoon meetings, and the public will be able to come to the meetings and participate and comment. That being said, you have a policy in front of you with several changes. Some of them are good, some of them are missed opportunities, and some of them may cause some problems. Since time is short, let me deal with the last first. It used to be we only had 2 minutes to speak up here. The last board graciously extended that to 3 minutes, which was a big, big help. In addition to those 3 minutes, the policy permitted people to finish their sentence or their thought up to a maximum of 15 additional seconds. That treated people like human beings, like the human beings that they are, and provided an important safety valve so that people left feeling that they'd been heard. To cut people off in mid-sentence, which is what this seems to say now with a fixed 3-minute policy, is unfortunate and may leave many people feeling worse than when they come in. I'm not saying you don't have the right to cut this back down. I wish you wouldn't. 3 minutes plus the 15 seconds I think is better, but if you must cut it down to 3 minutes, can you at least build into the policy an audible or visual warning at 2 minutes and 45 seconds so we know that we have to wrap up? At the last meeting, in contravention of your policy, I was cut off at exactly 3 minutes, and I was not given the courtesy that the policy provides for. I won't go into what your motivations might have been, but you violated your own policy, and I felt that I had been treated rudely. So I'm just me, and I'm here all the time, and that's okay. But when other people are faced with that, or if you base it on content or whether you like what they're, what they're saying or not, that would be very unfortunate. So if you have to bring it back down, I wish you wouldn't. Give us some warning. Good thing. 3 hours prior rather than fixed times. That's good. I think that's an improvement. On the other hand, there really is no reason why people should have to give the topic. If they want the benefit of being early in the list on agenda items, then sure, they would have to. But otherwise, if they're speaking on non-agenda items or don't care to say and go to the end of the list, you don't really need that much control. May I have my additional 15 seconds to finish up, please? Thank you.
Mr. Khan, I'm going to allow you to finish your
Thank you.
sentence, but there was never a 15-second. I mean, we clearly have had public comment where people go well into 1 and 2 minutes over, but please
I'm not going to.
Please feel free to finish your
Okay.
sentence.
I just wanted to suggest that you accept sign up by fax or email and possibly at the meeting. I don't know what it says, move to policy 9360 is the last thing on here. Are you moving this? It's not clear whether you're maintaining this as a separate policy or not. Thank you very much for your courtesy.
You're very welcome, sir. Colleagues, that brings us to this item on the agenda of, I think it does, Revised Board Policy 8345, Public Comment and Participation at Board of Education Meetings. And let's see, I entertain a motion. Item 10.1.
Move to accept revised board policy 8345.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. It's been properly moved and second that we accept the revised board policy. Is there any discussion? Mr. Harris?
I have a question about the 3-hour period. I'm just wondering, do the administrative assistants really need 3 hours to prepare when it comes to? It says 3 hours, the general procedures for public comment. The administrative assistants 3 hours prior to the time of the meeting is scheduled to begin, and that's the time they have to come in. Do they really need 3 hours just to sign up their name to speak at our meetings? I think that 3-hour period is a little bit too long. Maybe an hour. I mean, what's happening in between that time period?
Well, assuming you're talking about the call-in process for people to request to be put on the list, is that what you're referring to, Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Okay. So currently, as it stands, the process is that board staff, which we know spends prior time and all day for board meetings to prepare for board meetings. One of the things that board staff consistently does is to gather the requests for public comment, submit them to the administration so that they can, if they can be resolved or if there are issues that involved things that the public can get a resolution to ahead of time, they try to do that. As it stands now, there are certain meetings which are deemed as public hearings where people can sign up at the meeting. Those are hearings. But I think it's only appropriate to allow a specific time for board staff to prepare. They prepare that list throughout the day. If you pay attention, of course, we know board staff sends us the public comment list throughout the day and give us regular updates. I don't think it's reasonable to give them the opportunity to properly prepare, and I think 3 hours is probably generous. That's just my comment.
I'm still going to have to disagree with that.
Okay.
I just believe, colleagues, that if I do understand that you send the list to Dr. Height also, but that 3-hour period, I think we could possibly be missing a lot of people who would like to sign up, and we all know that some people do not find out well in advance. We get a lot of emails after the fact. Well, I didn't know about this in this meeting. I just believe maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours, but I don't know about 3 hours. If you come in an hour early and want to sign up, see something on the list that you missed beforehand, and you want to speak about it, they can the hour beforehand. They can still sign up for it. I just disagree with the 3-hour period.
Thank you, Mr. Burrows.
Ms. Harrison, what's the current hour provision? Currently, is it 3 hours? What is it currently?
I'm not clear on your question.
So right now, Jonathan has an issue with the policy reading that in order to sign up to speak at the board meeting, you have to sign up 3 hours in advance.
It is currently 3 hours, yes.
Oh, okay, so it's already 3 hours.
It's already, yes. We did not change that. That was in the policy. 4 hours? I can look it up real quickly.
I mean, it doesn't, it's not that important. You just call for the vote.
The policy currently reads, members of the public wishing to avail themselves of the opportunity to address the board may register for that purpose either by calling the office in advance of the meeting or by registering with the board administrative assistant prior to 10:30 a.m. on the date the meeting is scheduled to begin at 1:05 p.m. and prior to 4:30 p.m. on the date the meeting is scheduled to begin at 7:05 p.m. So in one instance, the evening meeting is 4:30 for 7:05. That's essentially 2.5 hours. And on the meetings in the afternoon, the 10:30 is 2.5 hours. So actually, it's less time in the current policy.
Right. So actually I think the section that Mr. Harris was referring to, it gives 3 hours prior to the start of the meeting, but in actuality it's 2.5 hours. So that section under general procedures, public comment, that says 3 hours is longer.
And that's why I believe the revised policy took out the 10:30, the 1:30 thing because of that inconsistency. It's now coming back to me when we had the policy review committee meeting.
Thank you. Any further comment? Okay. Ms. Beck?
Thank you. I think for me there does need to be a cutoff time frame, because on several cases we've had parents who are not getting the response they need at the local school, and out of frustration they just call the board office and say, I'm just going to come up because I'm not being heard at the school. And when a parent calls and says, I'm calling because of my child at this school, it gives the administration enough lead time to get to that parent and to say, you know, we're going to help you. How can we help you? And to address why the parent wasn't heard at other levels and felt the need to come up to the board or to sign up to the board. And I saw that for several times throughout the years where a parent will vent when we could have resolved this at several other layers of the system, but they just weren't being heard. And so I think that the 3-hour time frame gives us enough time when we know it's a parent who might even mention a teacher or a child to really be heard at this level prior to needing to vent at a microphone. I think that the day meetings, now that we have streaming and now that we have all of the information posted on board docs, except for the exec session information, I think that that does provide an exceptional amount of material that in the past you had to actually come to Sasser and go to the back table to pick up this information. And so the push out that board docs affords us is getting this material into the hands of the community. And I know it doesn't make much difference, but several years when I would go over at the county council, all of their meetings are in the daytime. I know Montgomery County meets in the daytime. And for a part-time board, many people who work, this affords somewhat of a flexibility for members who work, who can get off during the day, and members who need to have evening meetings. So it does allow flexibility rather than meeting all in the daytime or all at night. So for those reasons, I do support the revised policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Beck. Mr. Burrows?
Ms. Jacobs, I actually was not aware that when people call the board office, that list and their concerns get sent to the administration to resolve before they come and testify. I would be interested, whenever that happens, I still want to know, because that parent contacted the board office and wanted to talk to us, and even if their issue has been resolved, I mean, they wanted to talk to the board, they wanted to talk to us, and I would be interested to see, okay, you called the board office, we sent you to the superintendent, he was able to work it out, and this is the resolve. Because if we never hear from them, I mean, we could sit here and never know, some concerns that are going on in our district just because it never reached us at the microphone.
Mr. Armwood?
I just want to speak in defense of our public comment policy. Having come from the MABE, or not the MABE, the NSBA conference, and talking to other boards, I went to one session which was called Dysfunction in the Boardroom, and listening to their comments about how different boards handle public comment. We are actually very liberal, from what I'm hearing, in our public comment policy, in allowing both the time, the sign up, and some of these boards did not have public comment. I was very surprised. So I'm not that worried about how we have our board structured in public comment. I think we're doing fairly well, and we still have to control, so to speak, the number of people who sign up, and we have to have a cutoff. Otherwise, we'll have many nights with 140 or 50 people, and then more walking in as they hear something they don't like. Thank you.
Mr. Harris.
And just again, I disagree with the 3-hour period. I think 2 hours, maybe an hour. I just think that's best for our system. And one of the reasons why I say that is I do understand the point that you were making, Ms. Beck, and how the situations do get resolved before when it does stop. And I wasn't thinking about those. I was thinking about people who actually want to speak about the agenda items on the list. And when I go to talk to different students, a lot of them, they don't know 3 hours in advance if they can make it to the board meeting. Half of them, they really don't know how to sign up. They don't know about board docs. Half of them don't have access to computers. And when I get this information out, or when finally the information gets out, it may be an hour or 2 hours before, before a board meeting, or before they can find out that they actually can have a ride, or different things like that. Or they could, like I said, just randomly want to come to a board meeting, see an item that they may just want to put their input on. I mean, that's what these public meetings on public comments are about. So like I said, I disagree with the 3 hours. I think it should be maybe even 2.5. If that's what I'm hearing, that it was in the past, that it actually came out to be 2.5 before each meetings. But I just don't agree with 3 hours.
Call the question.
Thank you. Ms. Jackson, call the roll, please.
On the motion, Mr. Armwood?
Aye.
Ms. Boston?
No.
Mr. Barrows?
No.
Ms. Eubanks?
Pass.
Ms. Johnson? Mr. Harris?
No.
Mrs. Beck?
Aye.
Ms. Jacobs?
Aye.
Ms. Eubanks?
No.
Motion fell.
Thank you. Colleagues, that brings us to emergency item, I think, Dr. Height? School calendar, I'm sorry.
Move to accept.
It's been properly moved and second that we accept the school calendar for FY school year 2011-12. Any discussion, Ms. Johnson?
Madam Chair, I want to bring to your attention, the members of the board, that I've been looking at school calendars forever. And this particular time in looking at the calendar, and I also made note to the superintendent, for not the 2010 to 11 school year, but the 2011 to 12 school year, I am asking that our calendar committee sit and look at whether or not we are building a calendar that is more geared to having long weekends than to producing opportunities for good staff development. The staff development, we have fewer days than we have really ever had because it's a money issue, and I really would like to see that the first full week of teachers back to school is a full week, 5 days, in which the superintendent can begin to direct staff development along a line of a theme so that we can then look at how the entire system is approaching whatever Dr. Height feels is important, and then the next staff development day, we can then see, has it taken effect? So I am asking that the board look at the calendar development committee and see whether or not we can have some input to making the calendar be really a living thing that is going to help our staff, particularly our staff, and makes better utilization of our days.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Any other comments? Mr. Harris?
Dr. Height, I don't know if this actually goes directly into the calendar, but I really want to see if our system can start doing half days towards the end of the year when teachers start, when students start to take their tests. I know in Montgomery County, different counties, especially in private schools, they have 2 classes like the last week of school. They do their final exam for their first period class, final exam for the second period class, and then they're dismissed to go home. And I really think, in talking to the students, that do that in their county, they really say that does help them focus. Because instead of taking 4 final exams, what ends up happening is the last 2 days of school, maybe the first or the first 2 days on the last week of school, they have to cram in 4 hours of test. 4 periods of test, and it really doesn't work. So I want to see if we can start doing half days of school where we can have 2 tests a day, to really see if that will help out students. I know it will help out students, but I want to see if that's feasible for the system. I know our students have to have a certain number of hours in a school day, but that's a suggestion.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. And what I'm hearing you describe is an exam schedule. So it's a midterm and final exam schedule. And I think that's what you were referring to with our neighbors to the north and other school districts around the state and the country. We will take a look at that. We will not be able to do that for this calendar year because it takes some preparation, but we'd have to consider that as a component of how we look at the complete calendar.
Any other comments? Okay, thank you. Ms. Jackson, call the roll, please.
On the motion, Mr. Armwood?
Aye.
Ms. Boston?
Yes.
Mr. Barrows?
Yes.
You said no, Mr. Barrows? Yes. Ms. Eubanks?
Yes.
Why are we voting yes and no?
Ms. Eubanks?
Yes and no.
Yes.
To approve.
Ms. Johnson?
Aye.
Mr. Harris?
Aye.
Ms. Beck?
Aye.
Ms. Jacobs?
Aye.
Motion passed.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, the next item is item 11.1 under emergency, and it's the 2011 Maryland Youth Risk Survey, Behavior Survey, and that survey is required by state code, and it happens every year between April and May. And because of the way the board meetings are falling, we needed to present that at this board meeting so that it's approved before that survey is distributed to our students.
Move to accept.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Thank you, Ms. Baxter. And probably the second that we accept the emergency item 2011 Maryland Youth Risk Behavior Survey. Any discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Jackson, call the roll, please.
On the motion, Mr. Armwood?
Aye.
Ms. Boston?
Aye.
Mr. Barrows? Ms. Eubanks?
Aye.
Ms. Johnson? Mr. Harris?
Aye.
Ms. Beck?
Aye.
Ms. Jacobs?
Aye.
Motion passed.
Thank you. Colleagues, we do not have anyone signed up for public comment on non-agenda items. Any questions regarding follow-up items from the March 24th, 2011 board meeting? Seeing none, we must re-adjourn in executive session. Dr. Height, do you have anything else to add for the public, for the general meeting? Seeing none, we're adjourned.
Executive session.